Okay, so yesterday or Wednesday or so, we helped you put on this plugin that exists. And right now, when we first ran into this plugin, this SQL BI Visio Forward Engineering plugin, it was sort of a community initiated project by this Ferrara gentleman. It has since actually matured a little bit, and I believe it's in, what is that, CodePlex system, where you can put in various projects and have groups actually work on them. So it has matured away from an individual's personal project up to more of a community project right now. I believe it's still in, the version 2.0 is still in works. But what we have is everybody should have a version of the early version out there. And you might want to keep an eye on this down the road and see where that goes. Okay? But what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to go into Visio and generate a database model diagram from Visio, and then use his tool to actually take the diagram and move it forward into the actual physical layer, the physical scripts. Okay? So this is just an example of what the tool looks like. I presume that you all have maybe used this. If you haven't, this is a real quick concept of what you would do. Is you would generate a diagram in a database model diagram. You grab your entities and drag them over and use the palette to actually put the relationships and things on. Okay, so that's an example of the Visio that we're going to be using. But what I'm going to do right now is I am going to go and demonstrate a brainstorming, actually the demonstration is in the slideshow here. A brainstorming session is, there's actually another diagram that you can do in Visio called brainstorming. And brainstorming allows you to drop various types of objects on your screen. As you recall back to the video, the gentleman said just go ahead and draw a circle and put your center, put in your center what you're going to talk about. What we're going to talk about today in this demonstration is, think of a music collection. Okay, I have various types of music collections that I might have on my computer or in my CD albums or CD collections or whatnot. They're called albums, but they're really CDs or whatever, and I think they still use the term albums. So the center of it might be the album. The artist builds an album, okay? And again, these are types of things when you're doing your conception. I'm sure we'd go around the room and say, oh, this is really how that works, this is really how that works. The purpose of a brainstorming session is to get it all out in the open. If you're working with a team, then you can kind of debate on, you really want to think about it this way, or you really want to think about it that way. So this particular example could probably be done 14 different ways. But for the sake of this demonstration, the main center would be the album. So we have albums that are created by artists. So artists would actually, be associated to albums somehow. They create albums, and in the albums you might have things, songs in there. Okay, and again, then we're going to have genres that might exist. So each albums, or however the genre might be a part of the situation, and then we have musicians. Okay, so we're looking at that as a possibility, and we're doing brainstorming here. So then next thing we'd want to do would just be say, okay, how are the relations? Okay, we've got albums that are related to songs. Songs are a part of albums. And then we go and say, well, artists have albums, and genres might be associated to an artist. And again, we're all just saying, okay, musicians are so in a sense, we have an artist like a band, say, and a band has several different artists and musicians in it. So we have some kind of relationship like that. But we might want to take a look and then say, okay, now how are they related? And here's where we start looking at it a little bit more closely, and we might use our crow's feet. We have albums that might have many songs in it, but then again, you might have a best of album or something like that. So songs could potentially be associated to multiple different albums. A live album or something like that, where a song might appear in the original version and it might show up in a live album. Okay, but then we were looking at this saying, well, wait a minute, genre may not necessarily be involved in an album. An artist might be one album produce a country western album, and the next time they might put a pop album together. And sometimes artists cross over into various different genres. So perhaps the genre might be associated to the album. Okay, so here, the brainstorming, we're going to make the mistakes and fix them up. But then again, you might look at that again, and Andy brought up a point the other day. He says, what reality is genres might be associated to songs. So again, it all depends on how your brainstorming session is going, and you can sort of work that out in that detail. This is where you want to make the mistakes. Following up again, we're going to have artists, so there might be a particular musician that might be in a particular band one day, or a session musician that might play for several bands, or might be involved in several different artists. So there you might have a many-to-many relationship, and an artist might be consisting of several musicians. So this might be a good example of what we're going to, we might start with if we were going to build a music collection. Okay, so now how would something like that exist if we wanted to build that in Visio? And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually show you an example of how would we do that as far as the SQL Server part of it, the actual entity relationship diagram. So let me get out of here. Let me fire up my Visio Studio. I'm sorry, my Visio. Not my Visual Studio, my Visio. Let's see, where's mine?
Just type Visio.
Thank you. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just drop a few relationships in. I'm going to show you a little bit about some of the ways that we want you to use the Visio product today. Okay. First thing we're going to want to do is actually in here, there's two places I want you to look at. In the templates themselves, I believe it's under business. And we're going to go ahead and choose the brainstorming template. And when we do the brainstorming template, we have our objects over here that we can drop on, and we can drop a separate topic in. And we can draw the arrow from one to the other. Now when you want to change these arrows to crow's feet, we're just going to go into the formatting of the line, and we can select the crow's foot object up here. Okay? So you have all the different kinds of crow's feet objects that you want to use. Okay? I would just suggest just using, for the sake of a brainstorming session, just the standard crow's foot, and then you can, if you want to kind of think about it a little further, then you can start thinking about the optional ends, if you will. Okay, so that's the brainstorming. That's how we're going to use the brainstorming. The brainstorming is relatively simple. There's just a few things that are happening in there: the actual entity, the actual topic, and the lines, and then you can change the lines. Okay, so now as far as let's move that over into the database model. And when we go in and do the database model, there's a couple of things that we're going to ask that to make things simpler for you to help out is underneath the database display options. Okay, if you go ahead and select, can everyone see this? Select the crow's feet option. And the other thing that will be useful to you is to show physical name. Okay, if you use those two options in the relationship display object, what's going to happen is you're going to use crow's feet as the default relationship. Okay, and since we have the default set to, it'll be set to Microsoft SQL Server, when I drop and drag a table over, and in this case I would say put the album in there, I double click on it, and I can say this is my album table. And then I would want to start setting up my columns. When I start putting my columns in, and I'll put in a album ID, will make my album ID an integer. Okay, what will happen is I will be getting all of the values over in the data type that are set to the SQL Server. If I use the, if I didn't set the show physical name, I'm going to get a generic SQL Server name, and it might not be as easy to use. So for the sake of this thing, I know I want a big int, or I know I want a varchar or something like that. I will go ahead and make sure that I have the physical name shown, selected in my display, and then I can use the actual data types that I want. Okay, in this case, now what I can do is I can make this required in my primary key, and if I go into edit, what you'll see is in the data type area, I do have the ability to, well, where's my auto? In my edit. That's a little tricky to find, okay? If I want to set my identity on this, and if you understand SQL Server, you had the course, what I'm doing here is I'm building a primary key and I'm building an auto increment key. So every time that I drop something into the table, it will automatically increment that number one more, or whatever the next number in line is. So to get to that in Visio, you have to edit the field, and then you have to go over to the data type, and then you have to edit the data type and select the identity. And then what you'll see is you'll see that it becomes identifies. It's an identity. It's an identity object now. Okay, so that's how you would do that. Now let me put the other name in here. It's going to be title. Let's just put another field in here, a column in here called title, and I'll make title be a varchar, something or other, varchar 100 or something like that. Okay. And now I will drop a genre in, and in the definition I can call it genre. And the same kind of a thing here, where I'll make my genre ID. I'll make it a big int. Required PK for primary key, data type, edit, identity. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and add me a type in here. Make it a varchar. Call it 100 or something like that. Now, what I want to show you here is in the type category, the type column, this is where I can put what's called a constraint. Okay, so in the case of genre, we might have the situation where we're going to only ever keep in our music library something like pop, indie, rock album styles. Okay, so in order for us to have that restriction in there, we could do it a couple of different ways. We could obviously write the code in our user front end, or better, doing it a little bit more proper, is to actually let the database handle that. Let the database put that check constraint, a thing called a check constraint, in, so that you will not ever be allowed to put anything in except the values that you want. So if I create a check constraint, I can add the term pop in, and what this will do is it'll make sure that I can never put anything in that record unless the type is of the word pop, okay, or I can put rock in. Okay, so it'll have to check to see is the what I add. Oh, I'm doing range. Sorry, guys. My bad. So I want to put pop in here, and then I can put in rock. Okay, again, you can actually do a range from something to something, 1 to 2 or something like that. And I could put in also indie, something like that. Okay, so now what's going to happen here is I've just built a table that is going to have constraints on it. So now what do I want to do? I want to make sure that my wrong way. want to make sure that for every genre, for every album, I have an associated genre to it. Okay, so I'm going to build a relationship where my albums can have many genres. Okay, so to do that, what I did, get it bigger so you can see it. Go ahead and shrink this. Okay, hopefully you can see that. Okay, what I've done here is I am telling the system that I have a genre that can have that can be associated to many albums. So one genre can have many albums. Okay. However, my album has to be associated to a genre. That's just how we're going to sort of set this thing up, and then you can play around with the optionals and things like that, you know, if you wanted to. Okay. So now you see what it did also is it took the primary key and it automatically added the primary key. I should have made it ID, but that's okay for the sake of this demonstration. I had a typo in there. It automatically put the primary key in there as a foreign key. So this is a small entity relationship diagram. Now, what are we going to do with this? We could generate a forward engineer on this thing. Okay, so I'm going to take this actually, if I'm going to do that, let's make sure I put the right ID in there, so it looks right when I actually generate it. And you kind of notice it only did it in one, so after the fact, I do have to go back, and if I did an edit, I have to make an edit in here. Okay, so they line up. But what I can do now is I can do a forward engineer, and by clicking on the validation, it'll tell me if there's something wrong with it and everything is okay. So now I can do a forward engineer, and it's going to ask me, what database do you want this to be a part of? We'll just leave it the way it is. And in this case, it tells you where do you want this to be. Let me just create a subdirectory or put it somewhere where it's going to be easy to find. I'll just put it in apps. Okay. And I'm just going to put it in the subdirectory. The output file that I'm going to build is going to be called app/test. Okay. .c. Okay, it's going to generate the drop statements. It's going to generate the create statements. So you can set all these things up, and now what's going to happen? Boom, boom. Where'd you go? Here it is. Look what it generated. Okay, it generated all the code that I'm going to need now to take that code and put it into my system and generate that model. Okay, so that's a really powerful tool there where you can make your drawings and then you can actually generate the code that drops it in.